Peace to all. This is your brother David Rodriguez with another episode of Hispaniola History Channel, Portuguesa-The Portuguese of Hispaniola. This is part 1, Greatness in the Blood. For this one, we're going to get a little bit into the genetics, ancestry of those in the Dominican Republic, but this can also apply to folks from Puerto Rico, folks from Cuba, the whole Caribbean itself. This is Portuguesa, the Portuguese of Hispaniola, part 1, Greatness in the Blood. This is the Hispaniola History Channel, La Historia de Hispaniola, presented by David Rodriguez. Who were the Portuguese and how did they differ from Spaniards? Portugal and the global trade network. What made Portugal such a powerful nation during the age of exploration? Were so-called black people, Negroes, part of the Portuguese Empire? Should Dominicans, or Caribbeans as a whole, be proud of the Portuguese ancestry? What are the common genetics for Dominicans today? What are the general percentages? Dominican genetics in Hispaniola. Here we have a source, United States National Library of Medicine, National Institute of Health. According to this research here, they break down the genetics to 52% European, 40% Sub-Saharan African, and 8% Native American Taino. Now, this is specifically for Dominicans. The averages, usually the European DNA is a little bit much higher than the Sub-Saharan African DNA, according to the National Library of Medicine. But we also got to be aware of the misrepresentation, the misperception, and whitewashing of European and indigenous history when we deal with terms like white, black, European, African, and indigenous. We covered this in previous videos. So do Afro-Dominicans embrace their European ancestry? Why is European considered white? And what does that have to do with skin tone? Let's get into the legal definition of the term white, which has nothing to do with skin tone. Who is considered white in America? Here we have some sources. They do not conform to any biological, anthropological, or genetic criteria, meaning these are not based off skin tones or phenotypes. It's not defined that in terms of white people. Does not imply biology or genetic criteria. White people merely means anyone who has origins in peoples of Europe, Middle East, and North Africa. If you descend from there, that means you're white, according to the Federal Bureau of Investigations and the United States Census. Who are considered white Dominicans? The Dominican Republic Office of National Statistics. It breaks down white Dominicans as the majority of white Dominicans are descendants from the first European settlers to arrive in Hispaniola and have ancestry of the Spanish and French who settled in the island during colonial times, as well as the Portuguese who settled in the 17th and 18th centuries. Spanish DNA is common in Dominican Republic, but how about Portuguese ancestry? Is Portuguese genetics ancestry common in the Dominican Republic? Here's a question posted up on Quora. It says here online, there's someone asked a question. I'm a Dominican and I took a DNA test. My results were a little puzzling to me because it turns out I'm mostly Portuguese. I know Spain colonized the Dominican Republic, so shouldn't I have more Spanish ancestry? I mean, that's a very good question. So yes, Portuguese genetic ancestry is common in the Dominican Republic. Someone answered, someone named Vince Aragon says, there are Portuguese who were recruited to accompany the Spanish to the New World. The surname Silva, for example, is of Portuguese origin, but is a common surname among Spanish speakers in Mexico and the southwestern United States. Most don't even know that they have distinct Portuguese ancestry and think that it's just Hispanic name. Yeah, many people do not think of their Portuguese ancestry. They kind of just lump it into the Spanish ancestry and don't think much about the Portuguese side. In terms of my own genetics, Portuguese and Spanish genetic results of David Rodriguez, according to 23andme.com. So according to them, it lumps both of my Spanish and Portuguese genetics to 43.3%. And just to read a little bit of information here, it says the genetic landscape of the Iberian Peninsula, represented today by the people of Spain and Portugal, was influential by several Mediterranean civilizations, including 800 years of Arabic North African rule. Now, a small North African genetic signature is present in Iberian DNA, and over 8% of Spanish words carry Arabic origins. Conquistadors from Portugal and Spain colonized parts of Africa, Oceania, and the Americas, and DNA signatures of Iberian ancestry are now relatively common in people of Latin American descent. Many people who have Portuguese genetics may also have Sephardic Jewish ancestry as well. MyHeritage.com, it has me at 10.3% Sephardic Jewish / North African DNA. Just to read a little bit of information, the North African Sephardic Jews are part of the broad Mizrahi Jewish population and include those known collectively as Maghrebi Jews, acknowledging the western locale of their heritage from Morocco, Algeria, Libya, and Tanzania. Jews first made their way to northern Africa either as traders for the ancient Israelite kingdom or during the upheaval following the destruction of King Solomon's temple. Who were the Portuguese? What were their influence on the world? AncestryDNA.com has me at 16% Portuguese, while MyHeritage has me at 18.3%. Now, to read some information here, the region of Iberia, which encompasses Spain and Portugal, has been historically shaped by multiple civilizations and distinct populations, starting with the ancient Iberian tribes to modern-day Spanish and Portuguese people. In 1492, Jews were expelled from the region. In 1492, the Jews were expelled from the region, and Christopher Columbus set sail for the Americas, kicking off the age of exploration and conquest in the New World. Mountains and the north give way for the rolling plains of the south, while the Atlantic to the west and south led to a seafaring tradition that enabled the Portuguese to establish a trading empire that circled the globe. So this is something the Portuguese had over all European nations. But let's be clear, Portugal led the Spanish in world exploration and trade. It was Portugal that did it first. This allowed them to set up forts, castles all over the world, and they developed a specific style in these forts. These forts and castles that could be seen around the world where the Portuguese were, in Europe, in Africa, in India. They developed this particular style of fort building. Most of Portugal's colonies were defended by military fortifications. The fort was built in a functional style with an importance more on defensibility than on appearance. We know that they led Europe in traveling the world by sea, but who helped the Portuguese? I'm here in the book titled A Short History of Portugal, written by H. Morris Stevens. There's some highlights here. It highlights the height of commercial prosperity, on how the Moors or the Saracens protected the Sephardic Jews this is what made Spain so great. And the Sephardic Jews were superior to the German or Polish Jews, who were known as the Ashkenazim. So, to be clear, there's a difference between the Sephardic Jews and the Ashkenazim Jews, specifically during this time period. It says, wherever the arms of the Saracens penetrated, meaning the Moors, there we shall always find the Jews in close pursuit. So the Portuguese Jews possessed a high reputation for all over Europe for their wealth and integrity. So this was separated the Portuguese from the Spanish, but also separated the Sephardic Jews from the rest of the Portuguese. They were the elite. Now to go into some of the physical characteristics and descriptions of some of these Sephardic Jews in Portugal. I'm here in the book, The Natural History of Man, written by James Cowles Pritchard, Edwin Norris. It says the Jews of Portugal are very dark. Reading on the top of the book, page 132. It says the Jews of Portugal are very dark. not a little bit dark, not mulatto, not light skin. It starts off by saying the Jews of Portugal are very dark. Let's read on. It says, Jews, as it is well known, have been spread from early times through many countries in eastern parts of Asia, in China, Tartary, and the northern parts of India. So these folks were all over the world for a very long time, since ancient times, it says here, since early times. Coming down, it says here that Dr. Claudius Buchanan says he could not always distinguish them from the Hindus. He surmised that the blackness of the Jews spread throughout different parts of India is attributable to intermarriages with Hindus. So, according to this author here, is not only tying the Sephardic Jews to Portugal, but also to India, and intermarrying with the Hindus. It says here, in terms of spreading the blackness of the Jews, according to this author. So the Sephardic Jews were, according to this author, not only black, they were very dark, very black. Here in another book, Nature Knows No Color Line, written by J.A. Rogers. This is a very well-known book in the Afrocentric community. It highlights how Sephardic Jews brought the Negro strain into Europe. And the Negro was a surname, a common surname in Portugal. As far as Portugal, where the Negro slavery on a large scale was introduced, the Negro element was greater. So they're talking about Negroes in terms of slavery, but we just read in the book right prior to that the Jews of Portugal were very dark. So who are these Negro slaves they're speaking of? I mean, it might be two populations of folk, both being black. As we read, in Portugal, Jews were also brought in much of the Negro strain. Some of the nobles of the Sephardic families, aristocrats of Jewry, were Negroes. Let me read that again. According to J.A. Rogers, Nature Knows No Color Line, page 63. Third paragraph. The Jews also brought in much Negro strain. Some of the noblest of the Sephardic families, aristocrats of Jewry, were Negroes. So remember that white people is legally defined as the original peoples of Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa, according to the sources. But who were the original people of Europe? What did the scholarship and science have to say about this? I'm in the book Ancient and Modern Britons, Volume 1 by David McRitchie. He highlights that Europe originally inhabited by black Celtics or black Celts, Iberians of swarthy hue, and it was the Iberian ancestors of the people of England. Who were the Iberian ancestors of the people of England? Let's read. Remains have been found in Belgium and France and Britain, in Germany and Denmark, as well in Spain. A Neolithic race has consequently been identified with the Basques and the Iberians. The Iberian ancestors of the people of England recognizes the racial characteristic in the small swarthy Welshman, the small dark Highlander, and the black Celts. So according to this author here, the Iberians, the ancient Iberians, had a swarthy hue, and that they got that swarthy hue from the black Celts, from the swarthy Welshmen, and from small dark Highlanders. Who are these people? I guess they were the ancient Iberians in Europe. Let's go to another source, Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin, historic quote on swarthy Europeans. The source here, observations concerning the increase of mankind, 1751. You can find in Yale University Library concerning his observations of the people of Europe. It says here, the Spaniards, Italians, French, Russians, and Swedes are generally of what we call a swarthy complexion. So according to Benjamin Franklin, and he wrote this 1751, in those times, we're not even going into ancient times, in the times of the 1750s, according to Benjamin Franklin, the people of Europe, specifically Spaniards, were of swarthy complexion. Let's go into the science now. Iberian ancestors of the people of England, according to the science. The study of a 10,000-year-old man surprised people when it revealed his blue eyes and dark skin. So this is an ancient man in Europe with dark skin and blue eyes. But this genetic science is only backing up what the scholars are saying in the books. So this is all playing out in terms of real history, real science, in terms of a presence of a dark-skinned people in Europe. Nonetheless, they will still be considered white. They are the original white people of Europe. And another bit of interesting information in terms of the highest concentration of Iberian DNA in the world, you would think would be in the Iberian Peninsula or in Spain. But the highest concentration of Iberian ethnicity is in Puerto Rico. 91.6% of the people there have Iberian ancestry, which is higher than those in Spain and Portugal. The only two European nations they have there is Spain and Portugal. The rest are all in the Americas. So this is part one, greatness in the blood. You got to learn a little bit in terms of the Portuguese DNA ancestry in the Caribbean, specifically in the Dominican Republic. The Portuguese of Hispaniola. Know that if you do have Portuguese in your ancestry, in your DNA, that ties you into a people who ran the ports and the forts throughout the world, places like India, throughout Africa, throughout the Americas, controlling trade ports, doing it first before anybody else in terms of the European nations. And these were global empires that lasted for many years. So if you're one of Dominican ancestry with Portuguese DNA, this is something you should look at with some kind of pride. Portuguesa, the Portuguese of Hispaniola. Stay tuned for part two. Portuguesa, the Portuguese of Hispaniola. Part two will focus on the Knights of Santiago. The Knights of Santiago. That will be a very powerful and interesting presentation. Hope you stick around and stay tuned for that. Until then, this is your brother David Rodriguez with another episode of Hispaniola History Channel. This is Portuguesa Part 1, the Portuguese of Hispaniola. I hope you enjoy this first presentation. Stay tuned for Part 2, coming very soon. Peace. This is the Hispaniola History Channel, La Historia de Hispaniola, presented by David Rodriguez.